Hey everyone, Card Cafe here, more with some set 12 deck profiles continuing down the chain of stuff I have and want to talk about. This time we're here with the retrain of one of the original start decks of Overdress, my second favorite start deck after Nirvana, Viamance Buce. Well, I guess Viamance technically isn't from the start deck, but Buce is and is FFR Glory. This is a interesting deck that has gotten better with some really cool support in set 12, so that's why I wanted to talk about it now and not sooner, because any sooner than set 12, this deck was not fantastic. We'll say, I mean, granted, it's still not incredibly fantastic, but it's better. So that's why I want to talk about it, and I still think this is a cool card. So let's get into it, starting with our ride line here. The original grade 0, 1, and 2 are here still. Unfortunately, I really wish we had gotten an updated ride line that was a little bit better and more suited to Viamance, but oh well. So grade 0 boy over here is just like all your other starters. Per usual, if you're going second, you get to draw a card when you ride on top of him. And then grade 1, Diablo's Bad Steve, gotta love all the generic football names here, is just when he rides on Vanguard, you soul charge 1 and then choose a card from your soul and call it to rearguard. Almost always it's going to be your grade 0 just behind him to boost. If you're going second, that just makes a good attacking line of 14 that's harder to guard, so they can't just do a 15 no pass. So that's kind of cool, just a little bit of added booster pressure. And then if you're going first, it's just a rearguard on the board, which matters for your grade 2, which says when he rides on Vanguard, you put a rearguard into your soul and draw one card. So then you just put the card that you called out with Steve and get a card. So you're building a little bit of soul, you're drawing a little bit of cards. That's cool. A little outdated, because that's an original start deck ride line skill if you couldn't tell. But you know, it's not terrible. You're getting soul and you're getting a draw, which kind of matters, kind of doesn't, but you know, you do what you do. But Viamance here, this is really the cool card. It is FFR Glory, the quote-unquote upgrade from at least the grade 4 perspective. But what this one does is at the beginning of the battle phase, if you have a board of Diablos units, so if you know so far, your ride line were all Diablos units, he's a Diablos unit. Spoilers, everything in this deck is a Diablos unit for this reason. So it has to have Diablos in the card name. If your whole board has Diablos units, you enter the final rush state. And then if your opponent is at grade 3 or greater, you enter the final burst state. Now, the difference is that in final burst, his second skill activates, which is when he attacks, you counterblast 1, you choose a column and stand the rearguards in that column, and both those rearguards get 5,000 power each. So it's a pretty strong, consistent 4 attacks. That's going to be a big line because you're just standing the whole column, and they both get 5,000 power. It's not 5 attacks, which is what the other one did, but it does activate Final Rush a turn sooner. You're getting Final Rush on turn 3, which can be kind of interesting depending on your build and what cards that you're running that will activate immediately with you being in Final Rush. It also is activating at the beginning of your battle phase and lasting until the end of your opponent's next turn, which matters for certain cards, which is also something the other one didn't do. What the other Buce did do, for those who don't know, is that Final Rush activated at the beginning of the ride phase. So it didn't activate on turn 3, but it activated on turn 4 and on, and then finally you were just in the Final Rush state in the main phase. Now, that's unfortunate is that there are a lot of Diablos units, some that are not Diablos units, but a good amount of Diablos units that have really, really strong main phase skills that don't work with this because this is battle phase only. So there's a lot of skills that for older cards that we just can't use because they don't work. Or we have some cards that have really crazy good battle phase final rush skills, but they're not Diablos units, so it doesn't matter. Which is why this deck is definitely, I think, struggles a little bit even now, because we're just a lot of the really good final rush support doesn't work with Viamance because they either do their thing in the main phase or they're not a Diablos unit. But still a cool card. You get some pretty big numbers between Persona Ride, your other card skills, and him giving a column a 10,000 power essentially, and just a consistent 4 attacks, which is nice. He's also not requiring Soul. Before you had to Soul Blast 5. Now it's just a counter blast without Soul Blasting anything. So that's cool. We like that. It's just a little bit more consistent, but not quite as aggressive card, but still cool. Now we are running the Max Persona Ride as well as the Grail here. What's funny in this deck is we're not so much running the Max Persona Ride count for the power. The power is nice, but you get some pretty strong numbers without the Persona Ride. What it's actually really here for is the draw, because you'll find when we go through this, and the big problem this deck has is the lack of draw power, which kind of goes back to what I was talking about, where we lost a lot of really strong rear guards that we can't use in this deck that had Final Rush skills or were Diablos cards. A lot of those had draw power. Looking at Marjorie, for those who knows, just crying a little bit on the loss of that card. But so we really need to draw cards. Power helps, but we're drawing cards, so we want to run Max Persona Ride just to keep our hand advantage up. And then just the last kind of spot for the grade 3s is just 2 copies of our boy Diablo Striker Greg. What he says is pretty simple. When you enter the final burst state, so the one that only activates when your opponent is at grade 3, you Soul Blast 2, counter charge 1, and he gets 5,000 power till the end of turn. So it's your counter charger. It's just simple, just Soul Blast 2, counter charge 1, and then he gets 5k, so he's an 18k beater, which is nice. So you get some power, but really, he's your counter charge in the deck. You don't go through a super lot of counterblast in this particular build, but you do go through some, and if the game goes on for a long time, you'll need the counter charge. So you run 2 copies. You don't really need more than that. Now let's talk about the card that kind of brought this deck back a little bit. Diablos Ride Carrier Gino. Fun little card we got here. We definitely want to run 4 because he's pretty spicy what he does. Which is when your Vanguard attacks, if you're in the final burst state again, you Soul Blast 2, and then for every 2 cards in your damage zone, you choose one of the rear guards in his column and stand it. And if you stood 2 rear guards, you get to give 5k to both him and the other rear guard in his column. So this is your 5 attack enabler in this deck. This deck did not have 5 attacks until we got this card. So that's great because you use Viamance Buce's own skill, stand a column, that column will get 5k from his skill, and then if you're at 4 damage, which not hard to be at 4 damage in this deck, you use his skill, Soul Blast 2, stand him, stand the thing behind him, they both get 5k. So you just gave 10,000 power to both columns and they both just restood. So really good card for that, but that's not even just the only thing he does. The other thing he does, which is really good, is at the end of the turn, if you're in Final Rush, so you don't have to be in Final Burst, this will activate regardless, just so long as you're in the Final Rush state, he goes into the soul and you can take a normal unit from your soul, put it into your hand. So this is great for recycling Persona Rides, mainly is what you'll be doing, is after you've done a Persona Ride, end of turn, put this into the soul, take the original one, put it back into your hand. Otherwise, you can also just use it to recycle him, because it activates, it doesn't say you have to choose something other than himself, you can put him into the soul and then just target himself and put this back into your hand. So you don't have to worry about him getting like retired or nuked or something by your opponent. He's just safe in your hand for you to call back next turn. So really strong card, definitely 4. You're not running any less than 4 of this. This is all of our pressure because it's giving us 5 attacks again that are all pretty strong because it gives the column 5k. Yeah, it's relying on you having 4 damage, but like I said, you don't have a whole lot of hands, so you're probably getting pushed to 4. And even if you're not at 4, you still Soul Blast 2 and he will just restand himself. You can choose which thing in the column is getting restood. You won't get the 5,000 power unless you're standing 2, but you will still restand him. So you will still get 5 attacks. It would just not be as strong. But really good card regardless. So 4 copies. Next, we are running 4 copies of the boy who I will always run 4 copies of if we can make a strong argument for it. And that is Viamance Buce's Eden. Another OG set 1 overdressed unit. I feel like we're seeing a lot of these boys coming back lately in set 12. Looking at you, Bastion and Alden. But he is here. Now, why do we have a set 1 overdress card? Because 2 things. 1, he has only battle phase skills, which is nice, which are when you're in final rush, he gets 5,000 power, so he's just a 15k beater right off the bat by himself. And then if he was stood by a card effect, he gets a crit. So you target his line with Bruce, he restands, his column gets 5,000 power, he becomes 20 by himself, and he then gets a crit, which will matter a lot when we talk about the other new card from set 12. So just your main pressure card, just because it's a rear guard that gains a crit and is going to be pretty big. He's by himself, his column, even if it wasn't a Persona ride, the column is swinging for 33 on the restand because of the 10k from Bruce and his own skill. So pretty solid numbers, 33 with a crit. 43 with a crit if you are on the Persona ride turn. More than that if you have a grade 1 behind him that gains power in its own right. So just good numbers, crit pressure. We like that a lot. So 4 copies of him, and we'll explain why, the other reason it's 4, when we get to the grade 1s. But to round out the grade 2s, we are running our little tech option here in Diablo's Heavy Launcher Patrick. So Patrick is here primarily as the medical. And we'll explain why as we go over him. So what he says is, firstly, if you're in final burst, he just is a continuous 10,000 power. That's on both players' turns. He is just a free 20k beater and 20k to swing into when you're in the final burst state. So that's really good. Good numbers. And then his second skill, though, which is the main thing that he's here for, is Soul Blast 1. When he attacks a Vanguard and you're in the final rush state, doesn't have to be final burst for part of this skill. It says Soul Blast 1, choose one of your opponent's rear guards, and it moves onto the Guardian Circle. And then if you're in the final burst state, you get to choose 2 rear guards instead of 1. So why is this here? It's kind of a finicky card, right? You're forcing your opponent's rear guards onto the Guardian Circle. And those cards have shield for the most part, and so you're making it easier for them to guard this attack, which is true. But right now, the big deck to beat is Bastion. And Bastion still runs primarily grade 3s, and most of those grade 3s don't have shield. Some of them do, but most don't. So this is a really cheeky way just to get rid of them, because you just pick some of their rear guards. Yes, you can't pick the ones in the front because of Bastion's skill, but they'll usually have some in the back. You pick those cards, force them onto the Guardian Circle, and just get rid of them. And they don't have any shield. So it's a fun way to just kind of take out whatever they're leaving in the back, and usually just try and get around, because they'll usually have the one that has the shield, the new dragon that has 10,000 shield. That's usually in the front that you can't target anyway. So you use this to take out whatever's in the back and just keep getting rid of their boosters. So I like him just for that. And then he's also good just, and there's other matchups too, where just having the ability to force a card onto the Guardian Circle just to get rid of it as a removal option essentially is just good. So I like having 2 copies of him, and then also the 10k power that he has just makes him a really good beater. So 2 copies is kind of the tech spot. Now let's talk about the other new grade 1 that was really good here, which is Diablos Tailbacker Derek. So this is a really cool card that pairs really well with Eden, because what he says is if you're in the final rush state, he gets, when he boosts, your opponent has to call 2 or more cards to guard that attack. And he gets 5,000 power until the end of turn. At the end of the turn, he does retire. So it's a single card use, but for that turn, whatever he is boosting gets the guard restrict of they have to call 2 cards to guard. And then he also is a 13k booster, which we like that. But the main thing obviously is that he is putting even more pressure with the Eden swing, whereas this is your line. Eden gets a crit on the restand, and now this is making it so that they have to call 2 guards. They can't just perfect guard Eden. They have to now call 2 guards to guard him. And this line by itself, like we were talking about, you're at least 33, if not bigger. I think it's also 38 just because he's getting +5 for his own skill. He's in plus, so it's 28. Yeah, this is 38 no Persona Ride just from Bruce and their own skills. It's 38. It's 48 on a Persona Ride turn before triggers that they have to call 2 cards at least to guard. So it just adds a really good amount of pressure. They can't just perfect guard it. Takes a lot of cards out of their hand. He does retire himself, so you have to just be careful when you use this and make sure it's going to count. That's why we're only running 3 copies, not 4, which might sound a little weird. But because of that, it's kind of a situational card. So 4 is just not something you really need, just because you're not always going to want to use this card. So 3 copies, but just he's your best pair for Eden to save him for Eden when you're at their opponents at high damage. Now the most important grade 1 is Diabolos Madonna Maple. Mabel. Excuse me, Maple is a different card in a different nation. So, Mabel has a very simple skill, which is just that when she boosts your Vanguard, so when she boosts Bruce, if you're in the final rush state, counterblast 1, and you give your Vanguard the skill, or the text, depending on how you want to look at it, triple drive. So, why are we running 4 this? And a lot of people don't run 4. We're running 4 because this is currently the only plussing we have in the deck. There is no other units that fulfill the requirements of being a Diablos that activate during the battle phase that pluses you anything. This is it. If you're not running this and you're not running 4 of this and you're not seeing this immediately on turn 3 behind Bruce, you're losing advantage and losing it hard because this is it. Now, it's unfortunate that it's not drive +1, it's triple drive, because that means that Sanctitude stops it, which can be annoying. That they can just use Sanctitude and not discard. But where Sanctitude is just 1 card, they can't be running any more than just that 1 copy of Sanctitude. It's not a huge deal. They might not see it. If they do see it, they're only going to be able to do it once. They're not going to be able to do it over and over. So having triple drive is still just good. It's adding more pressure too, because that's 3 drive checks, right? So chance for more triggers, but really it's for the additional card in hand because we have no other way of adding more cards to our hand. So you really need high numbers of Mabel. I highly recommend 4 because you have to see it. All right, and then rounding out our last spot for the grade 1s in the normal units is Diablos Girl Stephanie. Another pretty simple card. She's just continuous. If you're in Final Rush, all of your other units in the same column as her get 5,000 power. So she's just giving the thing in front of her 5,000 power if you're in Final Rush. Now this is just a really cheeky card because, like we talked about, new Viamance Buce's Final Rush and Final Bursts lasts until the end of your opponent's turn. So your Final Rush state is active through their turn. So that means that your Final Rush skills, including Stephanie's, where she's giving the thing in front of her 5,000 power, is live on your opponent's turn. So that's making your Eden's 20Ks on your opponent's turn. That makes Patrick 25K on your opponent's turn. Like, it just makes your rear guards really hard to swing into. And also, if you don't have Maple, which you really hope, like so you're talking about, you really want to hope you have Maple, but if you don't have Maple, you throw this behind your Vanguard, because then your Vanguard is an 18k in your opponent's turn. And it can help potentially save you for the lack of cards that you have for not having Maple. So, cheeky card. Don't run 4 because you don't really need it, and it's not the craziest skill. It's just a little cheeky and just making your numbers even bigger on your opponent's turn, so it's harder to swing into your stuff. So 3 copies of her. And lastly, Perfect Guards. Nothing you haven't seen here before. Sanctitude, like we were just talking about, if they have the skill triple drive or the text triple drive, however you want to talk about it, you don't have to pay the cost to discard to use this as a perfect guard. And that's also not being chosen. You're not guarding from hand with this. It goes to the order zone. So it gets around guard restricts. And then your nation perfect guards. If you have 1 or less cards in your hand, you don't have to discard for this cost for perfect guard. So straightforward. That's pretty much always going to be the land for perfect guards until something changes, so nothing really to talk about there. Now, triggers. We're doing something kind of interesting here. I am running just 4 regular critical triggers. Now, I'm not running the effect crits because the Go to Soul crits don't do anything really in this deck. You're not getting a benefit, and the 2k is not making a number difference really anywhere. So you don't need them, and where you might find yourself occasionally in a situation where you have to call a trigger as a booster in case you have nothing else in your hand because you don't have any draw power, you want the 5k, not the 4k. So we're just running the generic crit here. But those are all of the crits we're running because the rest of the trigger lineup is 3 front triggers and 4 draw triggers. So why are we doing this? Well, the draws should be pretty obvious for what we talked about. There's no draw power in this deck, so we got to run at least 4 draws. I considered running more, but the 5k shield draw triggers feel pretty bad, especially right now with how big some attacks get. So I want to just stick to at least 10k shields, but definitely 4, no less than this, because you need all the draws you can get that don't have terrible shield. Speaking of that, the primary reason we're running front triggers is the shield. It's actually not for that 10k power, because you've seen we can do pretty well with the numbers, but that's not why you're here. It's because the effect front triggers get 5,000 shield so long as your opponent's at grade 3. So this is a 20k shield that is absolutely necessary to make sure we don't die. At least not die right away. So this is really just for defense, to try and survive as long as possible, so we do at least 3 fronts for the 20k shield. And for your heals, pretty standard for me at least. I'm doing 2 generic, 1 of each of the crit and the restand. You got a good amount of both crits, of things gaining crits and things that restand. So like 1 of each, but then again, as I've talked about before, I just like having 2 generics just so you always have 15k shield regardless of the situation that you're in. So I'll probably always run at least 2 of these. Unless we hit a point where absolutely everything is like restanding, or everything has crits, which granted, set 13 has a ton of restand, so you might see me running more copies of this next set, but for right now, I like the variety and having options. All right, and finally, what overtrigger are we running? We are running Mr. Red OT. So Dark State's overtrigger is not doing a whole lot for you in this deck because 1, we're not a restanding Vanguard, and 2, Bruce, because of the triple drive that Mabel's giving him, is almost always going to just get perfect guarded anyway. So the 10k and the crit doesn't matter because that attack's never hitting. So not a whole lot good there. And as far as the blue overtrigger is concerned, For me, the blue overtrigger needs to be doing something. There has to be a real good reason for the take a card from the drop zone to matter. So like decks where I've run in the past, like Bastion and Minerva, those cards relied on you having certain cards in your hand. So in those types of decks where you need to have certain types of your cards in your hand, that's where I run the blue overtrigger. But here, where we have a lot of aggressive high power cards on the rear guard that potentially have crits on the rear guard, I want to make them restand. Like using this skill, for those who don't know, is if you check this offensively and you pick a standing rear guard, and that standing rear guard gets the skill where at the end of the battle it attacks, restands. So that's just really strong. With Eden, it's got the guard restrict. So that's why I like it for, is basically your Eden target to get Eden to attack again with the crit. Feels really strong. And then also, if you didn't have any rear guards or nothing standing, you get to draw a card and call a card and then just do it with that. So really, this is your aggressive option, and where you're running an aggressive deck like this, where you're really relying on rear guards and multi-attack and trying to kill your opponent really fast. I like the red OT. I'm just adding to that. So yeah, that's what I got for the Buce, Viamance Buce deck profile. It's a fun deck. I do enjoy playing this deck, and I've been a big Buce fan since the beginning of Overdress. We just need draw power, man. That's like, it's the only thing we're really missing. This deck could really pop off if we had draw power, if we had more than 6 cards in our hand at any given time. But that's the problem, is we don't. Just give us like a Marjorie clone that's a Diablos, or just something that does something that's during the battle phase that draws a card. This is what we need. We just need a little bit more draw power, and this deck is really popping off. But I don't know. They're kind of sort of soft rebooting, question mark, Overdress after set 13, so who knows what'll happen to these decks, but I at least have a lot of fun playing Buce. It's an aggressive deck. I like aggro decks, so it speaks to my soul. But yeah, if you have any questions about Buce, shoot them in the comments, let me know. I'm happy to answer them, and otherwise you'll be seeing us soon. Thanks.